Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murderer. With me today is the panel as usual, so let's mix it up a little bit and start from the bottom and say, hello, Dr. Silkman. How are you doing today? Feeling good?
I'm doing well, Jeff, and big hello to the panel. It's great to be here, and I'd like to welcome everyone in chat. Thank you for coming along.
And Jack, how are you today?
Doing great. Hopefully no microphone and technical issues. And hello to the panel and hello to everyone in the live chat. Hey, thanks for coming along.
And Kelly, how are you doing today?
Good morning, everybody. I'm well. Welcome back, everyone in the chat and on the panel today.
And last but certainly not least, Big Jeff, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. It's great that we all had a week to calm down from last week's episode because boy, did that get everybody's blood boiling. And when you talk to Brendan, it always does. But somehow it just doesn't seem like a week is enough time to really calm down from a really nasty episode like that. But we'll see how it goes. Let's get onto it.
Are you ready, Big Jeff? Because this is going to be a
I'm
ripper.
ready.
Let's get to it.
I thought that was one of the most outrageous things I've ever seen. Pre-trial, I thought that was just unbelievable. It was so much, they went so much further than most prosecutors. Most prosecutors would have said, she was stabbed. Of course, there's no evidence that she was stabbed. Or she was shot in the head. But this, prosecutor creates this fantasy about what's happened, and then that spreads.
This picture of Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey makes more sense in hindsight.
You can see the connection between the eyes, and they obviously, without saying a word, know what each other is thinking.
Who are these people to say they're such experts that you can see in their... Now, Jeff, when I look at you on camera, or even if we're in the same room together, and I look you in the eyes, does that mean that we're on the same page? That everything... Is there some sort of... they're talking about fantasy. This journalism is fantasy journalism. I'm sorry.
You're 100% correct. I mean, they're just developing a narrative out of thin air. This picture makes a lot more sense because it didn't make sense before that, uncle and nephew would look at each other when they're confined to cribs as they're kept off their home because the police have their salvage yard under quarantine for 8 days. Unbelievably ridiculous. If you don't have anything to say, just shut the F up.
And I always just think back to these various news reports that, Internet Levy did. And boy, my most unfavorite of all, Emily Matesic, she was terrible, absolutely terrible, because beyond her news reporting, she had a blog. And it was terrible. And this goes beyond, it's like that they're supposed to have some kind of inside information, and they don't. It's just what they believe. And as a news reporter, don't they have some... I mean, certainly it's not the same responsibility necessarily as a police officer or, a prosecutor, but it kind of is because they're broadcasting their opinion to thousands of people that are watching the news broadcast.
Notice what's on TV.
There's additional information in the complaint as to additional torture, as to additional mutilation, as to additional mechanisms of death, which includes manual strangulation and gunshot wounds.
I can't think of a worse way to go than what he described in that press conference. I mean, that's a pretty gruesome picture to paint.
I believed him at first, and now it's the other way around. It's his friend coming out and saying all that stuff. I totally think he did it now.
It violated every sense of ethics that governs the conduct of prosecutors.
Kratz knew he wasn't supposed to do what he did. They all knew it, and he did it anyway.
They just put up one of Teresa's friends. And what did he say? This is, I can't think of a more horrible way to go than the way that Ken Kratz described. Think of how irresponsible that is. When we're sitting here knowing damn well that there is barely a lick of forensic evidence that corroborates Brendan's confession, to inform friends and family that this, we know positively, this is how your daughter went. It is just completely irresponsible and borderline, well, look, not even borderline, it's criminal based on what this says, but just a level of irresponsibility because of the anguish that you got to invoke just for the sake of getting a W in your column. Just complete malfeasance.
Notice what Kratz said right before we pause this right here. He said, in the complaint, there are additional whatever of torture and gunshot wounds. He even admitted then. He didn't say item FL, but he's alluding to it.
Legal ethics and ethical rules prohibit a prosecutor from discussing the contents of a suspect's confession. The rules are crystal clear. Ken Kratz just went way, way overboard here. And he had to know that what he was doing was wrong.
Brennan was just a pawn, just a tool that was used by the investigators and the prosecution to frame Stephen Avery. He was another piece of the planted evidence. You know, we've got the blood planted in the car, we've got the key in the bedroom, and we've got Brendan Dassey because they planted this story in his brain and got him to agree with it. And that they could have survived through the court system in Wisconsin, I think is shocking.
And then if we can't find anything, we'll just initiate. Exactly. Ms. Zellner called me and asked me to look over the case and find anomalies. And in this case, there are more than a handful of those, and that's unusual. One or two is expected. People collect, the documentation isn't perfect. That's understandable. But when there's a large number of these anomalies, these less than complete results, which don't quite fit into what you expect, you want to look at those in more detail.
The blood in the car, there was no mixture of the victim's blood and Stephen Avery's blood.
This one is the one that really baffles me, especially now. Okay, so back then, I think if we maybe let this play out a little bit more, I think, you know, as I know that Kathleen definitely brings it up in terms of the bathroom sink blood and how if you're taking it, you didn't know whose it really was. So you had to be mindful where you're planning it and how you're planning it and why you're planning it. But here's the contradiction that I find now in terms of her narrative. Okay, so follow along with me, guys, because it's not favorable, but I hope you guys understand it. So she's alleging Bobby Dassey is a top suspect, a Denny, that may have been responsible for killing Teresa Halbach. I think at this stage, we're all in agreement in terms of a Denny. He matches 100%. Absolutely. But here's the catch. Everyone in this panel that I have spoken to, I think we all believe at this point that the blood in the back of the RAV, which is allegedly Teresa's, is the most authentic. Based on the texture, the color, and just the placement of where it is. It looks like she's laid there, whether it was being injured, death, post-death, all those scenarios. Then we have the blood in the front of the vehicle, and I've always said it's like, for me, it's someone was trying to tell a story, and it's a breadcrumb, and it's put in those areas for reasons to connect to certain areas. But the non-mixture, now this is where I find the contradiction. Everyone says that if the police planted the blood, They never would have mixed it because they weren't sure if it was really Teresa's in the blood. They knew it was Stephen's, but they weren't going to risk throwing it in the back, because for all they knew, it could have been animal blood. It could have been anything. So there's that hold back and hesitation, like, hey, listen, we can't go putting Stephen's blood in the back and making that mixture when it could be anything. And I think that rule should apply for the killer as well. And the reason why I say that is this: if you are the killer and you very much know that blood is Teresa's because you're responsible for putting Teresa's blood in the back in terms of laying her there. You're the cause of her death. You're the cause of her bleeding. You know 100% it's authentic. You don't have to question it. If you are also the killer that has then gone and obtained Stephen's blood, whether you believe it came from the sink, whether you believe it came from the Grand Dam, wherever you believe it came from, which would have had to have been fresh, why would you, if you're that sophisticated to be able to beat physics, you are able to understand how important the blood is and the DNA, then why would you not consider mixing the two? Why not would you not go, listen, I know that both of these bloods are authentic to the people that it's meant to be, and the story I'm going to tell is that they were together at one time, and mix it. So when I look at it, it's like there's two crimes here. There's the death of Teresa, and she authentically laid in the back, either deceased or dying, versus somebody who has a hesitation. They're not quite sure who laid in the back. They're not quite sure why they laid in the back, but they've got an opportunity to put Stephen into it. And that's why there's no mixture, because there's like a hesitation, like someone wasn't sure what was real and what wasn't. Now, if it was the killer that was responsible for all of it, why the hesitation? You know what everything where everyone belongs to, and what belongs to who, and why it got there, and how you put it there, or in that narrative. So that's where I get really confused in terms of Kathleen, because she goes, she has made open statements saying it wouldn't be the police force, it wasn't law enforcement, because they weren't sure whose blood it was. Well, I can now say that for the killer. If they're responsible for all of it, they knew whose it was. So why didn't they do it?
Whoever planted the blood did it really quick, because if you have a look at the droplets make no sense. But what you have are two things. One, no mixture of any blood. Now, Kratz knew this, that there was no mixture. So he said that Stephen bled after he dropped off the RAV at the pit. That would try to explain why there was no mixture. So if you were the killer or co-conspirator, I would make sure I would go nowhere near where the victim was. And that's why you find two distinct patterns. The victim's in the back of the RAV, Stephen's blood are towards the front. Just an opinion.
You see, that doesn't kind of work, because you're risking, if you're the killer, period, going back to any crime scene, your percentage of cross-contamination of your own DNA goes up to 80% automatically. It's statistics. You can go on the Google, you can go on to all crime sites that produce this. Me and Kath have looked into it. So whether you're going to go into the back to plant the blood, returning to any crime scene, it starts from 40% to 80%. The moment you're now talking about not going into the back because you don't want to leave your DNA, if any of your DNA was found on the door and you are not even meant to have even seen her that day, and you're a Dassey or an Avery, you're fucked, because you shouldn't be there, whether you're in the back, the front, the side, the floor, the roof. You are not meant to be there. So I don't see how that works, because you would have had to have gone to the back to get her in. You would have had to have gone into the back to get her out. And I have to, I have to disagree in terms of my perception. I do think the blood drops are significant, and I do believe they're not random. The key, the one at the ignition, is to connect to the key. They want you to believe that Stephen had the key. The key was found in his trailer, and the area where a key should be, his DNA is there. his blood drip is in the back panel at the back. Everyone will go, okay, then, so what do you think they were trying to prove there? You see them ask him. There's a interview with Stephen. They ask him, was her seats up or down? Stephen actually says, I looked into her back seat and they were up. So that was a very, very early interview. So I think that the whole point of putting his blood there was to show the connection that her seats were found to be down. They wanted to find a connection that Stephen would have had to have put her seats down for some reason, because in one of Brendan's stories was they actually put her in the back because they were going to drive her and take her to, what was it, like a pond or a lake, and dispose of her through a body of water or something, throw her in the vehicle
in one of the pond.
In one of the
Correct.
pond. So
Correct.
I do think that the blood patterns, although I agree there's a rush element to it, I do believe that there is a connecting factor to it, because it's part of the narrative. Every question you see, they ask Stephen, there's an element where it's connected to that part of where his blood's found. And that's why I think there's that hesitation that someone didn't know exactly the authentic point of the blood in the back. They were just like, oh, is it Teresa? Is it someone else's? If we start throwing Stephen in the back and it turns out, and again, I think for a lot of people here that watch this Discussing a Murder and have been following the case, a lot of people are hesitant in terms of the timeline and what events occurred. Like, what did they know at certain periods? What came first and what was found after? So yeah, I just find that really hard to concept that that the killer wasn't trying to go back into the back. They had already had to have gone into the back to get her in and to get her out. They already risked, and let's face it, if they were the ones pushing the car, oh my God, not only are you on the outside, you've just contaminated the outside because of all the pushing, whether your hands are covered or not. But I think you're the first one to agree, Dr. Silkman, that, there's things called secondary transfer of DNA. I see a lot of people say that Bobby Dassey may have had his T-shirt off because he was using his T-shirt as a shield on, like, the back of the RAV4 sign to disguise it, to hide his fingerprints. But again, secondary transfer is another risk factor. He could have had DNA on his T-shirt and he's putting up against the RAV4, and while he's pushing it, he's transferring his DNA to it. That doesn't eliminate him by using a T-shirt over his hand. If anything, it still poses the same risk factors as if you were barehanded and you're just pushing it, because there's DNA everywhere. And yeah, that's the only thing I kind of want to push back on you, Silkman, because I think that I get what you're saying. It's a fair opinion, but I think that there's a balance to it. I think there's another way you can look at it as well. The truth is, we just don't know. And you made that point when you started it. We don't know what happened.
Correct.
So that's why we've got so many opinions and so many options, because we just don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying to look at all aspects and perspectives. And the issue is this, and you're right, Kelly. If you're the killer or a co-conspirator, if you try and then plant blood in that RAV4, there's always a danger of leaving a part of your DNA there, or forensic evidence that you were there. One thing we know for sure is that there are 8 sets of prints. They don't know who they belong to. But there's also one other very disturbing factor. And you have to admit, Kelly, this is very, very damning. And that is, someone had left their blood on the back door latch, A23. Now, you think about it. It meant that someone had shed their blood, and I believe left a print as well, on the very back door that you must open and close if you're going to put the victim inside the back of the RAV4. Now, Culhane only got a partial profile of A23, and she stated in court that it eliminated Stephen. In other words, whatever allelic profile she got, it didn't match Stephen. She never mentioned Brendan Dassey, and she never mentioned Teresa Hallbach. So I would imply from that that it wasn't either of them as well. It meant that we have a third party who shed blood and left their blood and a print on the very back door you must open and close to put the victim in. Believe it or not, guys, Sharika Hine never re-extracted A23, and Jack will tell you there was, I believe, genomic DNA extracted from a flash card that was in the back of the RAV4. Now, that wasn't processed either. So it's a mystery. And I do agree with you, Kelly. You would have to have someone dressed up in a forensic suit, right? So someone dressed up in a forensic suit with gloves on will not leave any evidence of themselves having gone inside that vehicle.
In terms of A23, you said a partial. So she was able to eliminate Stephen Avery based on that partial print or the DNA
Profile.
match. Profile,
DNA.
that's the word, sorry. Does that mean that everyone, like you said, she never mentions Teresa, she never mentions Brendan Dassey. Does that mean that any DNA she had on her desk in terms of whether you're a Dassey, whether you're John Doe, Frank Spencer, anyone, if you had the profile that you could kind of match and at that stage to what you had?
If you've only got a partial profile, it means that you can rule people in or rule people out.
So if A23 ever came out and we got the partial result and we've got certain DNA profiles of the Dassey family, the Avery family, you could almost do your own kind of elimination. Is that
correct?
Is that fair?
Correct. If you look at a particular locus and there were two alleles, say 14 and 16 at that particular locus, you can take anyone from the population, and if they have 14 and 16, the same alleles at that locus, you can say, I know it's only a partial profile, but I can't rule that person out. Do you understand? Because they've got the same alleles. Yep. But if Stephen Avery had 8 and 6 as alleles, you can rule them out because the alleles are completely different to the partial profile you have of that locus. So it's clear that when Culhane looked at the partial profile, which hasn't been published, by the way, she said, no, it's not Stephen. And she said that during the trial.
The partial print she has of A23, does that mean, would she have had to have gone through everyone individually to kind of go, hang on a minute, that could not have been Teresa. So I'm like, because like you said, she never brings up anyone else. And you would expect her to kind of go, it wasn't Stephen Avery and it wasn't Teresa. You know what I mean? Like, because I think a lot of people hang on to that. Like a lot of people say, well, in all technicality, Teresa Hallbach hasn't been ruled out either. Could it have been that it's Teresa's blood on the hand of the killer? And it's the killer's handprint with her blood on it, because let's face it, a lot of people, especially me, and this is the one thing I struggled with when I used to do my my puzzle diaries, is trying to comprehend the idea that we have 3 sets of blood and DNA profiles on one RAV at a murder scene, yet one of them's not meant to be there. And that would be A23, because it's not matching the state's narrative. So is it a coincidence that you've got everyone just happens to be bloody bleeding in this week? The killer, the real killer, Stephen, Teresa. But my point is, could have Sherry Culhane looked at the partial print, and would she have had to individually gone to every single one and gone, okay, it's probably not Teresa, because what I'm looking at here, or could it have been more straightforward to her? In my more of a question is, do you think that she could have backfired even more if she had, I'm going to put it out there only for the purpose because of the Denny if she had worked out that it was the Bobby Dassey had shared a similar loci to this partial print. If she held that back, would that fall on her, or does that mean that because it was partial, she can hide behind that and go,
well,
because she never rules anyone else but Stephen out, is my point.
The only reason why she talked about A23 is because she was asked by an attorney. Otherwise, Culhane never would have mentioned A23. And the reason why she was forced to talk about A23 is that Mr. Kratz made an error during his opening speech. And he said that Stephen Avery's blood was in the back of the RAV, right? And the attorney said, wait a minute, is that correct? And Culhane had to say, no, he made a mistake. There was somebody else's DNA in the back of the RAV apart from Teresa. And the attorney asked him, does that rule out Stephen? Was that Stephen's? No, that effectively ruled him out. So now you're correct, Kelly. We have a third genomic DNA profile in the RAV that's derived from blood, because remember the state's narrative was that Stephen was bleeding. Well, now we've got somebody else who was bleeding and had left their blood on the back door, right? Near the back door handle. That's telling, because it's blood on the victim's vehicle, where you have to open it up to put in the victim and open the door to take the victim out. Culhane never re-extracted A23. The state were not interested in A23. The state don't want you asking any questions about A23, period.
So you have a visible blood stain in A23. You can see it if you're close enough on the right. You can literally see the blood with your eyes, right? It's not something that showed up in luminol. It's so what is the probability, based on the fact that you can see it, that you that you could not extract a full genomic profile from a sample like that?
Well, that's very unusual, actually. If you see the blood, normally if you take a swab, you should have enough cells there to produce genomic DNA. And just to back that up, Culhane never saw any blood stain on item FL. Culhane never saw any blood on the key. And guess what, guys? Culhane was able to obtain a full, robust genomic DNA profile from the key and item FL. Guess what they found in the quarry? In the quarry, they found blood on a rock. In the quarry.
Item CX.
CX. And to make matters worse, it had rained, right? It had rained. So by the time they sampled that blood, CX, Lord knows what type of environment it had sustained. Yet, Culhane was able to obtain a robust genomic DNA profile from CX. And guess what? Item A23, she only got a partial profile, never re-extracted it. End of story.
So you know what? So what does that tell you? You know, I thought I'd read that that profile excluded the Dasseys as well, right? But if there was any way that partial profile could have inculpated Stephen or Brendan or any member of the Dasseys, she'd have been all over that like white on rice, right? So,
Correct.
I mean, exactly what does that tell you? That tells you that yet another thing that they tried to bury because it didn't fit the narrative of inculpating Stephen Avery, right? That's exactly what that tells you, right? There's no from a forensic expert, Dr. Silkman, he's telling us, with his 30 years of experience in this field or more, that it's practically impossible, you know, if unless you don't want to be able to extract a full profile from A23. So that just tells you where the state is.
Correct. I am truly shocked that Culhane never went back and re-extracted A23. But you see, it now makes the narrative much more complex, because not only do you have the genomic DNA of Teresa Halbach, the victim, you've got the genomic DNA belonging to Stephen Avery, your prime suspect. But lo and behold, you've got somebody else who left their blood. So it's not touch DNA, guys. It's blood. Someone was bleeding and they'd left their DNA on the back door handle and prints, which means that you've now got at least a third party. It's not Stephen. And the fact that Culhane never mentioned Brendan Dassey, I think that's telling, guys. We have an unknown third party who bled on the victim's vehicle.
Just 2 points, just to spiderweb out of this. But first point, I just want to address that. Don't you find that ironic? It's probably the only time that you see that you have a blood smear with a handprint, and that's what we've been arguing in terms of Stephen this whole time. Like, if he's bleeding, where's his handprint caused from a blood? Because if he's got it on his hand, and it's the only time we see it, and yet it's not his. It's the only person we can say indefinitely it's not Stephen Avery. A23 is not. Here's the next thing that kind of want to address, and it's a little bit controversial, but it's got to be mentioned because I'm only hitting these points because it's so big in the community, and I see almost 100 comments or questions a day on all different forms of media platforms where new people are still asking, and that's of course A23. But what about the fact that Pam's photos does not appear to show A23? Big Jeff said, the pictures that we do see in the crime lab, it's very straightforward that there's blood there. You see it with your eye, but in Pam's photo, that smear doesn't appear to be so vibrant and in your face. I'm not saying that's because it's a planted car. The vessel itself is not the right vessel. I'm talking in terms of could have the luminol or could have dusting down the RAV brought the oils out of the handprint, which surfaced out the blood, because the rain originally got to the RAV. Like, there's that real bittersweet, what's there, what wasn't, when did it come up? And then you've got, was it Harrington? It wasn't even Sherry Culhane that noticed it. It was somebody else that said to Sherry, you might want to swab there, that appears to be blood. Thoughts?
It's on the black part, right? Of the
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's just hard to see in Pam's. It's just you don't have the contrast. I think it's.
I agree.
It's that diabolical.
I just thought we should address it because it comes up so much.
I think the camera's not quite a high def.
Pam of God and her daughter Nicole, and in actual fact, also Fassbender, Remiker, all the officers who were there never saw any blood at all. Full stop. They never noted any blood in the RAV4 as well. So the fact that there could have been a very thin smear on the back door handle probably never crossed their mind. And it was only Groffy, I believe, who called Culhane over to say, hey, look, take a swab of this. So it was only noted in the laboratory under bright lights. So there probably would have been a very subtle smear, but it was there. And I believe it was presumptive positive for blood. And that's why Culhane took a swab to do a DNA extraction. So the first thing they do is they do a careful walk around the RAV4 and look for stains, red stains. They obviously found one at the back door. I don't think, you think about it, right? If you're a Pam of God, you would have had adrenaline flowing through you. You would have seen, oh my God, there's the RAV, right? God guided her to the RAV. Her heart would have been racing. She wasn't looking for small little droplets of blood. She was looking for Teresa, right? And so it could have easily been missed.
The initial pictures of the RAV that were released were compressed via JPEG. And I'm reasonably sure that the pictures that Henbury got of the RAB, which came out a couple of years ago, were much higher resolution than the original pictures that we saw of the RAB by a lot. You can zoom in a lot, see a lot more. I've never went and looked for A23, but I'm pretty sure those pictures are higher resolutions than the ones that we had years before that. So check that out and tell me in the comments whether I'm wrong about that or not. But I think they are. With regard to Kelly's earlier question, I have a lot of trouble thinking to myself, well, why didn't the real killer do this or that, and why isn't there a mixture? I think to myself, well, Stephen and Brendan are in prison. The murderer, the planters did what they needed to do, and they might have just got it by a shoestring, but they did enough, and all in their minds when they were doing this. I don't really think they had any idea that this would spark sort of the spectacle that it turned into. Number one, and number two, and when I say the spectacle, I'm talking about the trial itself, how it was getting daily attention. And number two, they never ever considered Laura Riccardi doing an entire Netflix documentary on this. That would probably horrify them. I mean, we have had the time. We've had years to pour over this evidence. A jury has, literally weeks to hear it. They're getting evidence thrown at them, but by a fire hose that's spraying information in their face. There's no way that they could absorb it all. So I almost have to take, unfortunately, a little bit of a grain of salt when people say, the killer didn't do this and it was a mistake. And maybe it was, but it's at the end of the day, it's a small detail that you'd be very unlikely for sort of a jury of non-experts, non-technical experts, and even non-true crime enthusiasts to be able to latch on to some of these things, or even take it seriously, not given the amount of time that the people on this panel and probably the people in the chat have had to think about it. And my next point is again a little bit different. That there's an old expression, right? And that old expression is, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. And I think that Kathleen Zellner has realized the truth of that expression. And you can look at her last filing as bringing a knife to a gunfight, because she had a lot of great points, and the best of her points ended up being procedurally barred. I think that kind of enraged her. Kathleen Zellner has one job. Her job is to get Stephen a new trial. And right now there's one fastest route to that, and that route is through Denny. And I don't even think that, I don't think or care whether Kathleen even believes half the stuff that she wrote in that filing, right? But she had to do a couple of things in that filing. One of them was avoid accusation of law enforcement, as Dr. Silkman has said many times. And two, point out somebody who, point out anyone, whether it was Bobby Dassey, whether it was Ryan, whether it was me, that said, okay, this person meets the prongs of Denny. Therefore, by the United States Constitution, this person is entitled to a new trial. And I don't care whether that view has flaws or not, because that's bringing a gun to a gunfight, right? She's met the prongs, and she's telling Judge Angie, okay, I've met the prongs. Now what are you going to do? Right, so she's really forcing the state's hand in a lot of ways. I don't care whether she believes it or not. I don't believe half of it, but that's not the point. The point is it's logical. Met the prongs. He's allowed it by the United States Constitution. It is the name of Denny, and therefore, if that's ruled true, he gets a new trial. Period. End of story.
She might not believe it. We might not even believe it, but Angie needs to believe it. And if we're struggling in certain points, Angie needs to believe it.
She can't jump to the conclusion that a jury needs to come to. Right?
But she did. She's already done it, though. Jeff, she's already done it. Her first motion she denied, she spoke on behalf of the state. She's already done it. She's not scared to keep doing it because she didn't lose. Because at the end of the day, the Court of Appeal, she wasn't overruled. So she got away with it.
I have to go back and look at the places where she's got away with it, whether those things end up being procedurally barred. So whether the procedural bar overruled the the fact that she ruled out of turn and made assumptions that the jury needs to make, or conclusions that the jury needs to make, as opposed to but I agree. She's gone out. She's part of the corruption here. There's no doubt. And I have no doubt that this is going to need to go to appeal in order to be able to properly adjudicate it, because she's part of the problem that we're looking at. And I don't think she'll be afraid to do it. Hopefully, the Court of Appeals will see things differently.
Although it's horrible to say, putting the victim in the back while you're bleeding, and then getting in the car and driving, and the victim's blood is only in one spot, and the supposed assailant is always in another. You know that they've been in contact. So why isn't there a mixture? Why isn't it get spread around? That's what you expect to see in something as violent as what was described. And that's really not what the DNA results from testing the specific areas tells us.
I believe that the prosecutor in Stephen Avery's trial had a strong suspicion the blood evidence was planted. All of Stephen's blood is in the front of the car. All of Teresa's blood is in the back of the car. Any experienced prosecutor, anybody who's done murder cases, knows that's a huge red flag. Because that was a huge red flag, the prosecution needed to have another body fluid somewhere else on the vehicle. What would be really ideal would be if Brendan Dassey could talk about Stephen Avery touching or doing something else in the car that would leave DNA evidence.
Yeah. Okay, what else did he do? He did something else. You need to tell us what he did after that car was parked there. It's extremely important.
That he left the gun in the car.
That's not what I'm thinking about. He did something to that car. He took the plates, and I believe he did something else to that car.
Oh.
Okay. Did he go and look at the engine? Did he raise the hood at all or anything like that? To do something to that car?
Yeah.
What was that?
What did you do, Brendan? It's okay. What did he do?
What did he do under the hood if that's what he did?
Is that an example of feeding evidence to him again, guys?
They said to Barb at the end of the last episode, we didn't put any pressure on him at all. We've been doing this for a long time. We know when someone's lying, right? How is that feeding Brendan this thing about the hood, which is obviously shows why the hood latch swab is completely and totally planted? How does this fly into the face of their narrative that they know Brendan's lying? We didn't put pressure on him. The pressure. What did he do? We're going to sit here. We're going to get in your face. We're going to glare at you until you give us an answer. And he's sitting there with his friggin' finger in his mouth because he has no idea what to say because he can't think of anything.
What's even more shocking was that Fallon in the court trial said, okay, they fed it to him. So what? So even though Brendan never stated that his uncle went under the hood, that whole notion was fed to him by Fassbender, Fallon completely roughshotted it and said, yeah, so what? Guess what? We took a hood latch swab, and guess what? We found Stephen Avery's DNA. Well, don't you think this is remarkable, guys, that hadn't Brendan spoken a word, they would have never got the hood latch swab. They never would have got item FL if Brendan never said a word. And that goes to show how much of a piss poor effort the forensic examination of the RAV4 was. Correct, guys? that they never properly
100%.
examined the RAV4 from the very get-go. As soon as they got the victim's blood, as soon as they got the suspect's blood, all party was over. They stopped everything. Now they've dragged in Paul Brendan and they got this additional extra forensic evidence in order to make Brendan's narrative believable.
I don't know what he did, but I know he went under.
He did raise the hood. You remember that?
Yeah.
And voila. Suddenly, Brendan Dassey is talking about Stephen opening up the hood and touching the hood latch. No one swabs the hood latch initially. The hood latch isn't swabbed until after Dassey's confession. What's interesting is the crime lab did the blood swabbing in the car, but they did not do the swabbing of the hood latch. That was done in Calumet and taken to the crime lab. And magically, when they test it, it's got Stephen's profile on it. Wow, what a piece of luck that is. Now you're not dependent anymore just on that blood evidence. And kind of like Nancy Grace said, I mean, it's the sweat DNA that convinced me.
I like the way Kathleen Zellner puts it. What a piece of luck! But I still got to cling to my man miracles. But what a piece of luck!
Yep.
Well
People
said,
who
Kathleen.
weren't supposed to be involved, all of a sudden they find the evidence again, and she can see through it. And that's why I think this is really a great moment for her.
When I watch this again, this just reminds me of why she strategically now has tried to remove law enforcement, because she knows this, that she's outlined, she just walked us through the timeline. She walked us through what the law enforcement needed. Now, we all know logically the killer couldn't control that. The killer can't control what the law enforcement will look at, how they would piece it all together. And I don't think any of us believe that the killer was that enthusiastic and that intelligent that they were walking around with touch DNA or whatever, like DNA that they had in their pockets, blood, Stephen's cells, just to be able to start planting them everywhere. She knows. She sums it up so perfectly here that the baseline of this is law enforcement. It could only have been law enforcement / the lab, because they're the ones that ultimately produce these results that came back as Stephen and how high it was. So I just wanted to touch base on that. When I watch this again, I know that Kathleen has moved the pinpoint a little bit, and I know that she addresses that the hood latch swab was potentially Bobby planting his Stephen's DNA, but again, I think even more so, it's strategic.
That hood latch swab was done 149 days after the fact. Think about it. 149 days after the fact, which goes to show that the forensic examination of the RAV4 was such a piss poor effort. It is shocking. When you've got the car in the lab, you do all the forensic analysis in situ then and there. You wait 149 days later to go and swab the hood latch, yet you don't swab the little latch inside the vehicle that you have to open in order to pop off the hood. You don't check for prints. You don't check for bloods. The whole thing is a scam. Now, Zellner, she's no dummy. She knows the crime lab and law enforcement had an involvement, but she can't present that because she's going to get laughed again and her filing will get tossed in the bin. So she's got to play by the state's rules. And so what she's done is presented the perfect Denny. She's also presented Brady violations because she knows that's the strongest way she can, get a new trial for Stephen. Does she believe in the narrative that Bobby did everything? I don't think so, right? We could tell by her demeanor saying, oh, well, guess what, guys? They swabbed the hood latch and boom, they got only Stephen's profile. And that's truly remarkable.
Yeah, there was an early YouTuber who was part of the original Eric Cozy Wrecking Crew. Was it Julie or trying to remember who it was? She's not doing YouTube anymore, but she made a great point about the hood latch swab itself, which we've seen pictures of, not being dirty enough. Have you remember that?
Allie Asperson.
Allie Asperson, that's right. And I wonder if that one did that go anywhere, Jack? I mean, does that show? I don't think that shows up in the documentary, but I thought that was an absolutely brilliant observation. That if you go and you put put a piece of clean cotton or whatever they use on your that underneath, which is really exposed to all the elements and backsplash, it ought to come back pretty dirty, don't you think?
It should, and I think that came out in an interview that Zellner did with that guy. I can never think of his name.
Pelenik.
Yeah.
Dr. Pelenik.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
He does. It does come up in MAM. It does come
up
in MAM
in
part
okay.
2.
Okay.
Yep, where they look at the hood latch, the actual cotton swab. They did microtrace analysis, and it came back as very, very clean. Not what you would expect if you took a swab of a hood latch, because you're correct, Big Jeff. You'd expect to find grease, oil, and all sorts of debris. And remember, guys, Stephen Avery wouldn't have been the only person touching that hood latch. Anybody who went underneath that car could have potentially have left their DNA. And nothing
well,
was
Doc,
found.
how many people actually touched that hood latch after? I'm talking about not anywhere else. How many people touched that hood latch after it went to the crime lab?
Let me lead you right into the wrap-up comments there.
Are we beginning the wrap-up here? So I think that we have officially broken the record for getting through the least amount of the documentary while just yapping it up for an hour and 10 minutes.
That's a great point, Big Jeff. I just want to point out to the viewers that maybe we didn't warn you, but we did say in the beginning of this season, this is a different beast. Go ahead, Jeff.
We did say that, and it is a different beast, and boy, it's so great to be able to, debate and make our points collegially the way that we do. I really love talking to everybody on the panel, and we're friends. We don't get mad at each other. That's one thing I love about this panel. For me, that the thing that sticks most to me about the tremendous amount of footage that we just reviewed, is Kathleen Zellner just continuing to peck away at all the evidence. And it's something that we've said all along. It's that Brendan's coerced confession leads to the discovery of two obviously planted pieces of evidence, that because the state had to maneuver Brendan into both of these aspects of his confession. One that we just talked about, which was the hood latch. The other one being, he shot her outside. No, I mean, he shot her in the garage. Had to maneuver him into the garage so they could find item FL too, right? So two obviously planted pieces of evidence that come back after Brendan's coerced confession. Zellner's picking them off one by one, absolutely masterfully. And Ken Kratz must be living rent free in Ken Kratz's head right now, because her cool, calm, and collected demeanor must be really grating on him, given where his life situation is right now, and it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. So with that, I'll hand it off to the next.
Thank you, Big Jeff. I appreciate that. Yes, I believe that KZ is living rent free in Ken Kratz's mind. Absolutely. Dr. Silkman, if you wouldn't drop your wrap-up comments, please.
Well, I did say jokingly to the members of the panel that I reckon that Stephen and Brendan will be released and home before we actually finish the series. But look, it is really great and refreshing to have these open and frank discussions. And as you can see, that we all don't agree, but we discuss the points in a collegial manner, which has been fantastic. And, Making a Murderer Part 2, I really enjoyed this one because this is where Kathleen Zellner has employed professionals in various disciplines to take apart the state's narrative. And we're seeing it happen as we go through the episodes, and it's been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Silkman, for all your insight and help getting us through this. And then, Jack, if you wouldn't give us your wrap up.
Yeah, very, very interesting episode. I actually lost a couple. We can always find some really good points. And Zellner, I mean, she is very strategic in so many ways. I mean, who do all the, these procedurally barred and all these other things would happen, but they did. And now she has to deal with it. And I think that's what she's doing. And as we've discussed, the latest filing is razor sharp. She's playing specifically by their rules to see where it goes. And we'll see what happens. Some really great conversation on that. A lot of good debate. And as Doc said, it was civilly done. And we have to have it. And that's just the way we have to operate, and not the name calling and all this other bullshit that, that often comes along with the between guilters and truthers. Even as truthers, we don't always agree. And to be able to talk about it openly, we have to have that discussion. I agree. And once again, as Big Jeff always gets quoted, on to the next.
Yeah, on to the next. Kel, if you wouldn't give us your final comments today.
Great episode. When Dr. Silkman said by the time, we finish here, the boys will be out, it'll be Christmas. But I think it's good to take it slow, because I think when we're breaking it all down, it's these fine details that even for me, I have forgotten, and it's just really refreshing to kind of like bring it all back and assess it again, and just sharpens your mind. I agree with the panel. I think it's great that we have discussions, and I agree we shouldn't all agree. There has to be balance. There has to be diversity. None of us know what happened, so every opinion matters.
All right. Well, again, this is Jeff Jones, and I want to say thanks again to everybody for listening along in the chat and sharing on your social media and being involved with our channel. We really appreciate your work. So for Big Jeff, Kel, Jack, and Dr. Silkman, this is Jeff Jones saying this has been Discussing a Murderer.